The Resistance. While Sarah worked on her technological warfare, Elena Vasquez prepared for the physical campaign. The quantum displacement drives had been successfully installed on 3 ships: the Resolute, a heavily modified corvette named Ghost, and a small stealth vessel called Shadow. These ships would form the core of humanity's offensive strike force, appearing in impossible locations to hit targets the Velcor thought were safe. Elena spent days studying Velcor tactics and deployments. Marcus provided intelligence from Earth-based observations and intercepted communications. The Velcor were methodical, efficient, and predictable. They had perfected their approach over thousands of years, refining it against dozens of conquered species. They followed established protocols, moved in standard formations, and relied on their technological superiority to overcome any resistance. That predictability would be their downfall. Elena planned a series of hit-and-run attacks designed to confuse and demoralize the Velcor forces. The quantum drives would allow her ships to strike, then vanish before the enemy could respond. She would target supply lines, isolated patrols, communication relays. Nothing dramatic, just constant harassment that would force the Velcor to spread their forces thin and question their assumptions about human capabilities. The first attack came 18 days after the initial Velcor assault. The Resolute appeared without warning in orbit around Ganymede, where the Velcor had established a forward operating base. Elena's weapons officer launched a full spread of missiles at the alien facility, then the quantum drive activated, and the Resolute vanished. The entire engagement lasted 37 seconds. The Velcor base was crippled, its docking facilities destroyed, its garrison left confused and disorganized. 6 hours later, the Ghost struck a supply convoy traveling between Mars and Earth. The small corvette appeared in the middle of the formation, fired its railguns at point-blank range into the lead transport ship, and disappeared again. The Velcor escort vessels opened fire on empty space, hitting nothing but their own ships in the confusion. Elena coordinated these attacks from the Resolute, appearing across the solar system in a pattern designed to seem random, but carefully calculated to maximize psychological impact. The Velcor had thought the war was over. Now they were learning that humanity was far from defeated. Each attack was small, inflicting minimal damage in the grand scheme of things. But the cumulative effect was significant. The Velcor were being forced to divert resources to defense, to question their security, to fear the sudden appearance of human ships in locations that should have been impossible to reach. The Council Responds Executor Thrain convened an emergency meeting of the Velcor Council in their flagship, the Eternal Ascendant, which orbited Earth like a sword hanging over humanity's throat. The 7 member species gathered in holographic form, each leader appearing from their respective homeworlds. Thrain stood at the center of the council chamber, his forearms held in a gesture of controlled frustration. The human resistance was becoming problematic. The attacks themselves were minor, easily repaired, replaceable losses, but the fact that they were happening at all contradicted everything the Velcor understood about this phase of conquest. Defeated species surrendered. They recognized superior force and submitted. They didn't continue fighting with experimental technology and guerrilla tactics. Thrain had reviewed humanity's military history extensively before recommending the attack. Humans were aggressive but rational. When faced with extinction, they negotiated. When outmatched, they surrendered. The Velcor had seen this pattern in every human conflict. Why were they behaving differently now? The council debated strategy. Some members advocated for a demonstration of force, suggesting they destroy one of Earth's major cities to remind humanity of the consequences of resistance. Others recommended increasing patrols and tightening the blockade. A few suggested negotiating, offering humanity a chance to surrender with dignity rather than face complete annihilation. Thrain rejected all these suggestions. Destroying cities would only strengthen human resolve, turning their desperation into fanaticism. Increased patrols would stretch Velcor resources thin across the solar system, and negotiation would show weakness, suggesting that humanity's resistance was actually working. Instead, Thrain proposed a different approach. They would find and destroy the human command structure, cut off the head of the resistance. Without leadership, the scattered human forces would collapse. He assigned his best intelligence officers to locate Earth's military command centers. The Velcor had sensors that could detect power signatures, communication emissions, and industrial activity. It was only a matter of time before they found Marcus Webb's hidden facilities and eliminated them. Then this irritating resistance would end, and humanity would finally accept their fate. What Thrain didn't know was that while he was planning humanity's defeat, Sarah Chen was preparing to activate her virus. The countdown had begun. The turning point. 28 days after the Velcor attack, Marcus Webb gave the activation order. Sarah Chen sat at her console in New Zealand, her finger hovering over the trigger command. Around her, technicians monitored the virus's spread through the Velcor network. Coverage was at 93%, better than they had hoped for. Almost every Velcor vessel and facility in the solar system was infected. Some ships in the outer reaches of Council space remained clean, but they were too far away to respond quickly to the chaos that was about to unfold. Sarah pressed the button and watched her creation come to life. Across the solar system, in hundreds of Velcor ships and stations, the virus activated simultaneously. Targeting systems that had been perfectly calibrated for millennia suddenly reported false coordinates. Communication systems that had never experienced interference began scrambling frequencies. Fire control computers developed microsecond delays that threw off weapon trajectories by hundreds of meters. Navigation systems reported positions that were slightly, subtly wrong. The effects were subtle at first, just minor glitches that the Velcor AI systems attempted to correct through standard protocols. But the virus had been designed to resist correction, to hide its presence, to make the Velcor systems fight themselves in an endless loop of problems and attempted fixes. The more the AI tried to compensate, the worse the problems became. Elena Vasquez watched from the Resolute as the Velcor ships in Earth orbit began drifting out of formation, their station-keeping thrusters firing erratically, their communication channels filled with confused chatter as captains tried to understand what was happening to their vessels. This was the moment humanity had been waiting for, the window of opportunity when the Velcor were blind and confused. Marcus gave the attack order to all surviving human forces. It was time to hit back with everything they had. The Resolute, Ghost, and Shadow activated their quantum drives and appeared at key locations around the Velcor fleet. But they weren't alone. From hiding spots throughout the solar system, human ships emerged. Some were military vessels that had survived the initial attack by playing dead. Others were converted civilian ships, mining vessels and cargo haulers armed with whatever weapons could be mounted. Even some damaged ships that had been written off as destroyed suddenly powered up, their crews having made desperate repairs in secret. The attack was coordinated chaos. Human ships appeared from impossible angles, fired everything they had, and either vanished via quantum drive or fled at maximum acceleration. The Velcor tried to respond, but their compromised systems made effective return fire nearly impossible. Missiles that should have tracked human ships instead flew off into empty space. Energy weapons that should have been lethal missed by margins that made the difference between life and death. Captain Robert Chen led the Defiance in a direct assault on a Velcor battleship that had been positioned to bombard Earth cities if humanity showed resistance. His ship was smaller and less powerful, but with the enemy's targeting systems corrupted, he could close to point-blank range. The Defiance's railguns hammered the battleship's hull at distances where missing was impossible. The Velcor vessel tried to rotate to bring weapons to bear, but its maneuvering thrusters fired inconsistently, turning what should have been a smooth rotation into a tumbling spin. Across the solar system, the scene repeated itself. Velcor ships that had seemed invincible now found themselves vulnerable, their technological superiority negated by the virus eating away at their systems. Human forces that had been hiding in fear now struck with vengeance, each ship fighting not just for survival but for revenge. The message as the battle raged. Marcus Webb broadcast a message to the Velcor Council on all frequencies. His face appeared on every screen, every display, every communication system the aliens possessed. He spoke in clear, simple English, knowing the Velcor translation systems would convert his words. Humanity had a message for the Velcor Council and for all the species that had submitted to their rule. Earth would not surrender. Earth would not be conquered. The Velcor had made the fatal mistake of believing that a species' technological level determined their worth, their intelligence, their right to exist. They had attacked humanity expecting quick submission, thinking that superior weapons guaranteed victory. The message as the battle raged. Marcus Webb broadcast a message to the Velcor Council on all frequencies. His face appeared on every screen, every display, every communication system the aliens possessed. He spoke in clear, simple English, knowing the Velcor translation systems would convert his words. Humanity had a message for the Velcor Council, and for all the species that had submitted to their rule. Earth would not surrender. Earth would not be conquered. The Velcor had made the fatal mistake of believing that a species' technological level determined their worth, their intelligence, their right to exist. They had attacked humanity expecting quick submission, thinking that superior weapons guaranteed victory. But the Velcor had forgotten something important. They had forgotten that warfare wasn't just about technology. It was about will, creativity, and the willingness to do whatever necessary to survive. The Velcor had spent 8,000 years crushing species before they could become threats. In doing so, they had eliminated all internal conflict, all competition, all the forces that drove innovation and adaptation. They had become stagnant, their tactics unchanged for millennia because they had never needed to change. Humanity was different. Humans had spent their entire history fighting each other, developing new strategies, new weapons, new ways to overcome superior force. Every human conflict had taught lessons that were passed down and refined. Humanity understood guerrilla warfare, asymmetric tactics, psychological operations. They understood that you didn't beat a superior enemy by fighting them fairly. You beat them by fighting smarter, by finding their weaknesses and exploiting them without mercy. Marcus delivered his ultimatum. The Velcor would withdraw from the solar system immediately. They would leave humanity alone and never return. In exchange, humanity would allow them to leave peacefully. If the Velcor refused, if they tried to continue their occupation, humanity would take this war to Council space. They would hunt Velcor ships across the galaxy. They would use their quantum drives to strike targets the Velcor thought were safe. They would introduce chaos into an empire that had known only order for thousands of years. And most importantly, Marcus revealed the virus. He explained in detail how it worked, how it had spread through the Velcor network, how deeply it had infiltrated their systems. He told them that every ship, every station, every facility that used networked AI was potentially compromised. The Velcor could try to purge the virus, but doing so would require shutting down and rebuilding their entire technological infrastructure from scratch, a process that would take years and leave them vulnerable during the reconstruction. The choice was theirs. Leave humanity alone and maintain their empire, or continue this war and watch their civilization collapse into chaos. The retreat executor Thrain listened to the humans' message from his damaged command center aboard the Eternal Ascendant. Around him, his officers struggled to maintain control over systems that no longer responded properly. The battleship that had taken decades to build, that represented the pinnacle of Velcor engineering, was now barely functional thanks to a virus created by a species they had dismissed as primitive. Thrain felt something he had not experienced in his long life. Genuine fear. Not fear of death, but fear of the unknown. The Velcor had encountered hundreds of species in their expansion across the galaxy. All of them had followed predictable patterns. All of them had submitted when shown the futility of resistance. But these humans were different. They didn't accept defeat. They adapted. They innovated. They found ways to fight that the Velcor had never anticipated. The human commander's threat to take the war to Council space was not empty bravado. With their quantum displacement technology, humans could strike anywhere without warning. Velcor worlds that had known peace for millennia would suddenly face attacks from an enemy that could appear and vanish at will. The panic alone would destabilize the Empire, and if the virus continued spreading through Council networks, the entire technological foundation of Velcor civilization could collapse. Thrain made his decision. He had spent his career studying warfare and strategy. He knew when a battle was lost. The Velcor had superior numbers and technology, but they had underestimated their enemy's will and creativity. Continuing this fight would cost more than it would gain. Pride was not worth the destruction of everything the Council had built. He opened a channel to Marcus Webb, his golden eyes meeting the human commander's gaze across the distance. Thrain spoke with the dignity of a leader accepting defeat, acknowledging that the Velcor had misjudged humanity. The Council would withdraw from the solar system. They would leave Earth alone. But Thrain also issued a warning. Humanity should not mistake this retreat for weakness. If humans ventured beyond their system and proved to be the aggressive threat the Council feared, there would be consequences. For now, Earth had earned the right to exist on its own terms. Within 48 hours, the Velcor fleet departed Earth orbit. Their damaged ships limped toward jump points heading back to Council space. They left behind debris, ruins, and 4 million dead, but they also left behind a humanity that had been tested and had refused to break. Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the Resolute, watching the last Velcor ship vanish into faster-than-light travel. Around her, the crew erupted in cheers, celebrating a victory that no one had thought possible. But Elena didn't cheer. She looked at Earth below, still dark in places where power had not been restored, and thought about the cost of survival. On Earth, Sarah Chen emerged from her underground laboratory for the first time in weeks, blinking in the sunlight. She had created a weapon that had defeated a galactic empire, but she had also opened a door that could never be closed. Now the galaxy knew that humanity existed, that humans were dangerous, that Earth would fight rather than submit. Other species would hear this story. Some would respect humanity's strength. Others would see them as a threat that needed to be eliminated before they grew stronger. Marcus Webb stood in his command center, reading reports of casualties and damage. 6 million dead in total when including those who had died in the aftermath of the attack. Entire cities without power or infrastructure. Years of rebuilding ahead, but Earth had survived. Humanity had proven that they belonged among the stars, that they would not be conquered or controlled. The war with the Velcor Council had ended, but Marcus knew it was just the beginning. Humanity had been tested and had passed, but now they existed in a galaxy that knew Earth was inhabited by a species that would fight to the death rather than surrender. Some species would seek alliance with this fierce new power. Others would seek to destroy humanity before they could grow stronger. Marcus began planning for the future, for the day when humans would venture beyond their solar system as equals rather than supplicants. Earth had been provoked, and the galaxy had witnessed the retaliation. Now humanity would have to live with the consequences of their victory, ready to defend their freedom against any threat that came from the stars. The age of human isolation had ended. The age of humanity as a galactic power had begun, and the universe would never be the same. The betrayal and the beginning. The shuttle descended through the crystalline atmosphere of Apex Prime, and Commander Sarah Chen watched the magnificent structures of the Galactic Council headquarters grow larger through the viewport. Beside her, Ambassador Marcus Webb adjusted his formal diplomatic jacket for the third time in as many minutes. "Nervous?" Sarah asked. Marcus managed a slight smile. "We've been preparing for this trade negotiation for 6 months. Everything depends on getting favorable terms for our expansion into the Outer Rim territories." Sarah nodded but said nothing. She had commanded Earth's flagship during the Proxima crisis, and she knew how to read situations. Something felt wrong. The usual chatter on the diplomatic channels had been eerily quiet for the past week. Their shuttle landed on Platform 7, reserved for member species of the Council. At least that much remained normal. A delegation of Voral attendants waited at the entrance, their 6-limbed bodies moving with practiced efficiency, but none of them made eye contact. "Ambassador Webb, Commander Chen," the lead Voral said, its translator rendering the words in flat, emotionless tones. "The Council awaits. Please follow." They walked through corridors that had once felt welcoming. Sarah had been here 5 times before, and each visit had been filled with the bustling energy of 1,000 species conducting the business of galactic civilization. Today the halls were nearly empty. The grand chamber doors opened with their familiar resonance. The vast amphitheater stretched before them, tier upon tier of seating rising toward a domed ceiling that displayed a real-time view of the surrounding star systems. Hundreds of representatives from across the galaxy sat in their designated sections. But unlike previous sessions, every single seat was filled. Sarah's hand instinctively moved toward where her sidearm would have been if weapons were permitted in the chamber. "Humans of Earth." Chancellor Vorath's voice boomed through the space. The tall, crystalline being stood at the central podium, its form refracting light into rainbow patterns. "You have been summoned to hear the will of the Council." Marcus stepped forward. "Chancellor, we understood this session was scheduled to discuss trade agreements and—" "There will be no trade agreements," Vorath interrupted. The Council has made a decision regarding humanity's place in galactic society. Sarah felt her blood run cold. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a tribunal. Marcus stood straighter. What decision? Vorath gestured with one of its crystalline appendages. For the past 32 years, humanity has been a member of this council. In that time, you have established colonies on 47 worlds, built a fleet of 300 vessels, and expanded your territory faster than any species in recorded history. We followed every protocol, Marcus protested. Every world we colonized was uninhabited. Every expansion was approved by a council that did not understand what humanity truly was. A new voice cut in. Councillor Thex of the Kryn Dominion rose from his section. His reptilian features twisted in what Sarah recognized as contempt. We extended our hand to a species barely capable of interstellar travel, thinking you would be grateful. Instead, you have become a threat. A threat? Sarah couldn't keep the anger from her voice. We've contributed more to Council scientific databases than any 3 species combined. We've helped settle disputes, provided humanitarian aid during the Tau Ceti famine, and you have built weapons, Thex hissed. Weapons that exceed Council regulations. Ships designed not for exploration but for war. Marcus held up his hand, signaling Sarah to remain quiet. Our defensive capabilities are necessary. The galaxy is not entirely peaceful, as the Proxima crisis demonstrated. Without Earth's intervention, the Proxima system would have fallen to pirates. The Proxima crisis was resolved with excessive force. Another counselor called out. 17 pirate vessels destroyed. No attempts at negotiation or capture. Sarah's jaw clenched. Those pirates had been slaughtering civilian transports. Earth's fleet had saved thousands of lives. Chancellor Vorath raised both appendages, calling for silence. The time for debate has passed. Over the last 4 council cycles, we have observed humanity's trajectory. We have analyzed your expansion patterns, your military development, your aggressive approach to problem solving. The conclusion is unanimous. Sarah felt Marcus stiffen beside her. Humanity represents a destabilizing force in galactic civilization. Vorath continued. Your species is too young, too volatile, too dangerous to remain within the Council's structure. Therefore, by a vote of 378 to 12, the Galactic Council hereby expels Earth and all human colonies from Council membership. The words hit like a physical blow. Sarah heard Marcus's sharp intake of breath. Furthermore, Vorath said, all trade agreements are immediately void. All technology-sharing programs are terminated. A quarantine zone of 50 light-years will be established around all human-controlled space. Any human vessel found beyond this zone will be considered hostile and dealt with accordingly. Marcus found his voice. You're condemning us to isolation. Our colonies depend on Council trade routes. Our people will adapt or perish, Thex said with evident satisfaction. Humanity made its choice when it chose aggression over cooperation. Sarah wanted to argue, to fight, to make them see reason. But she had spent enough time in military command to recognize a done deal. This vote had been decided long before they arrived. This entire session was just theater, a formality to make the Council feel better about what they were doing. We request the right to appeal, Marcus said quietly. Denied, Vorath replied. The decision is final. You have 30 standard days to withdraw all human presence from Council space. After that, any humans found within our territory will be arrested as trespassers. The chamber erupted in discussion, but Sarah noticed something. Most of the Council members wouldn't meet their eyes. Even the ones who had voted against expulsion looked away. They knew this was wrong, but they were too afraid to stand against the majority. Marcus turned to Sarah. We're done here. They walked back through those empty corridors in silence. The Voral attendants kept their distance, as if humanity's expulsion might be contagious. Within an hour, their shuttle had launched, setting course for Earth. For the first 3 hours of the journey, neither of them spoke. Sarah ran system checks she didn't need to run. Marcus stared at his datapad, reading the same page over and over without processing any of it. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. 378 to 12. Yeah, Sarah said. Do you know what species voted in our favor? The Talvek Consortium, the Mirian Collective, and the Solon Union, Sarah replied. She had noticed during the vote. All relatively new council members. All species that the older powers treat like second-class citizens. Marcus nodded slowly. They voted for us because they see themselves in us. The outsiders. The ones who don't quite fit into the established order. And now we're all the way outside. The journey back to Earth took 6 days. Marcus spent most of that time composing reports and preparing his presentation for the Secretary General. Sarah spent it thinking about what came next. When Earth finally appeared in the viewport, Sarah felt an unfamiliar sensation. Not fear exactly, not even anger anymore. Something else. Something that felt almost like relief. We tried to play by their rules, she said quietly. Marcus looked up from his work. What? The Council's rules. We followed them. We compromised. We held back our natural tendencies because we wanted to be accepted. Sarah turned away from the viewport. Maybe it's time we stopped trying to be what they want and started being what we are. Marcus studied her for a long moment. That sounds dangerously close to proving them right about us. Does it? Sarah asked. They called us aggressive, but we've been defending ourselves and others. They called us expansionist, but every world we settled was empty. They created a narrative about us and then convinced themselves it was true. Maybe the real problem is that we're too different from them and different scares them. So what do you suggest? I suggest we survive, Sarah said, and then we build something better than what they have. The shuttle docked at the orbital station 3, and they were immediately escorted to a secure conference room. Secretary General Amara Okafor was already there, along with Admiral James Harrison, Defense Minister Chen Wei, and a dozen other high-ranking officials. We received your preliminary report, Amara said without preamble. Tell us everything. Marcus and Sarah spent the next 2 hours recounting every detail of the council session. When they finished, the room remained silent for nearly a minute. Finally, Admiral Harrison spoke. 378 to 12. They weren't divided. They were nearly unanimous. The vote was decided before we even arrived, Marcus confirmed. This was about making themselves feel better about abandoning us. Defense Minister Chen leaned forward. What are our immediate vulnerabilities? Trade, Marcus said immediately. 40% of our colonies depend on imported supplies from council space. Medical isotopes, rare minerals, specialized equipment. If those supply lines get cut, they will be cut, Sarah interrupted. They gave us 30 days, but I'd be surprised if we have half that before the blockades go up. Amara's expression remained calm, but Sarah could see the calculations happening behind her eyes. Admiral Harrison, what's our military status? We have 293 operational vessels, Harrison replied. Most are exploration or light defense craft. We have maybe 30 ships that could stand against Council military vessels in direct combat. If they decide to enforce their quarantine with force, we're outgunned 50 to 1. Then we don't fight them directly, Sarah said. Everyone turned to look at her. Not yet anyway. We focus on survival first, making our colonies self-sufficient, building up our industrial capacity, and we do it all inside their quarantine zone where they've given us free rein. Amara nodded slowly. Go on. The Council thinks they've contained us, Sarah continued. They've drawn a box around human space and told us to stay inside it. But they've also told the rest of the galaxy that anything inside that box is ours to do with as we please. We have 50 light-years in every direction. Hundreds of star systems, most of them unexplored. Marcus caught on. We don't need the Council's trade routes if we can produce everything ourselves. And we don't need their approval to expand inside the quarantine zone. Exactly, Sarah said. They wanted to isolate us. Instead, they've given us room to grow without interference. Defense Minister Chen was already pulling up star charts. There are at least 200 potentially habitable worlds within the quarantine zone, and probably 1,000 systems with useful resources. We'd need a massive increase in our industrial capacity, Admiral Harrison pointed out. Shipyards, manufacturing centers, agricultural stations. That's a 10-year project at minimum. Then we'd better start now, Amara said. She stood and everyone in the room stood with her. I'm calling an emergency session of the Global Assembly. We need to present them with a plan. Over the next 72 hours, Sarah barely slept. She worked with Admiral Harrison and a team of military strategists to outline humanity's defense needs. Marcus collaborated with economists and colonial governors to develop self-sufficiency protocols. Engineers proposed revolutionary new manufacturing techniques. Scientists suggested research programs that had been deemed too expensive or risky under Council oversight. When the Global Assembly convened, Amara presented their plan with simple clarity. The Galactic Council has made their decision, she told the representatives of Earth's nations and colonies. They believe that by isolating us, they have eliminated a problem. They are wrong. What they have actually done is freed us from their limitations. She activated the holographic display, showing the full extent of the quarantine zone. This is not a prison, Amara continued. This is our opportunity. Inside this space, we will build an infrastructure that makes every human colony completely self-sufficient. We will develop technologies without council restrictions. We will establish an economy that doesn't depend on their trade routes. And we will create a military capable of defending our people against any threat. How long will this take? Asked Representative Okoro from the African Union. Phase 1 will take 5 years, Amara replied. That's establishing basic self-sufficiency. Phase 2, where we achieve technological and military parity with council species, will take another 5 to 10 years. Phase 3, she paused for effect. Phase 3 is when we decide what comes next. The vote was unanimous. Every nation, every colony, every human settlement committed to what they began calling Project Genesis. Sarah was given command of the Naval Expansion Program. Marcus became the head of the newly formed External Relations Bureau, tasked with gathering intelligence on the Council and making quiet contact with potentially sympathetic species. The first year was brutal. 3 colonies nearly failed when their supply lines were cut off earlier than expected. Earth's economy strained under the massive investment required for Project Genesis. There were protests, shortages, and moments when it seemed the whole plan might collapse. But humans proved to be remarkably good at adapting under pressure. New mining operations opened in asteroid fields within the quarantine zone. Agricultural stations were established on marginal worlds that the Council had deemed worthless. Earth's engineers developed closed-loop manufacturing systems that could produce everything from medicine to starship hulls using only locally available resources. By the end of the 3rd year, not a single human colony depended on external trade for survival. By the end of the 5th year, humanity's fleet had doubled in size. Sarah stood in the observation deck of the newly completed Titan yards, watching as the first of Earth's new generation of warships took shape. The vessel dwarfed anything humanity had built before, and it incorporated technologies that would have been impossible under Council regulations. Marcus joined her at the viewport, carrying 2 cups of coffee. The Talvik Consortium made contact, he said quietly, through very unofficial channels. They want to discuss possible cooperation. Sarah accepted the coffee. They're one of the species that voted against our expulsion. Yes, and they're not the only ones reaching out. The Miran Collective sent feelers last month. Even some species that voted for our expulsion are starting to have second thoughts. The Council's economy has been stagnating. Turns out humanity was contributing more than they realized. Good, Sarah said. Let them regret it. There's something else, Marcus continued. Our intelligence network has intercepted communications between the Kryn Dominion and the Council's military commission. They're concerned about our expansion. There's talk of a preemptive strike to contain the human threat before we become too powerful. Sarah sipped her coffee, watching the construction crews work on the massive warship. Do they have the votes for military action? Not yet. But Thex is building support. He's been circulating projections showing that in 10 years, Earth's fleet will rival the combined strength of the Council's top 5 military powers. Are his projections accurate? Marcus smiled slightly. Actually, they're conservative. We're ahead of schedule. Sarah allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. 5 years ago, the Council had cast Earth aside, thinking they had eliminated a problem. They hadn't realized they were creating something far more dangerous than an ambitious member species. They were creating an independent power with nothing to lose and everything to prove. Let Thex build his support, Sarah said finally. Let the Council worry about what we're becoming, because by the time they decide to act, it will be too late. She turned away from the viewport, ready to get back to work. Humanity had 5 more years of building ahead of them. 5 more years to transform from an exiled species into something the galaxy had never seen before. An empire built not on the Council's approval, but on humanity's refusal to accept anyone else's limitations. The Galactic Council had cast out Earth, thinking they were protecting galactic civilization. They were about to learn that their real mistake was giving humanity something to fight for. The Empire rises 10 years after the exile, Commander Sarah Chen had become Fleet Admiral Chen, and the transformation she had witnessed was beyond anything she had imagined possible. She stood on the bridge of the UHNS Defiance, humanity's first super dreadnought, watching the tactical display show the positions of Earth's expanded fleet. 293 ships had become over 800. And these weren't the multi-purpose vessels of a decade ago. These were specialized warships designed by humans who had stopped trying to meet Council standards and started exceeding them. "Admiral, we're receiving the weekly status reports from the Colonial Network," said Lieutenant Jackson Park, her communications officer. "Put them on the main display," Sarah ordered. The screen filled with data. 63 human colonies, each one now completely self-sufficient. New Shanghai on Proxima Centauri b had a population of 12 million. New Lagos was exporting advanced electronics to other human worlds. Armstrong Station in the asteroid belt had become the largest mining and manufacturing complex in known space. But the numbers that interested Sarah most were the ones that never appeared in official reports. The secret installations, the research facilities developing technologies that would have been banned under Council regulations, the weapons that made even the Defiance look conventional by comparison. "Any word from Ambassador Webb?" Sarah asked. "He sent an encrypted message an hour ago," Jackson replied. "The Talvek meeting went well. They're ready to move forward." Sarah nodded. Marcus had spent the last 10 years building something remarkable, a shadow network of species who felt marginalized by the Council's old guard. The Talvek Consortium, the Mirian Collective, the Solon Union, the Varan Federation, a dozen others. None of them powerful enough to challenge the Council individually, but together with Earth's backing they represented a significant bloc. "Admiral Chen, you have an incoming call from Earth," Jackson announced. "It's Secretary General Okafor, Priority 1. Sarah moved to her private office off the bridge and activated the secure channel. Amara's face appeared on the screen and Sarah immediately noticed the tension in her expression. "Amara, what's happened?" "The Kryn made their move," Amara said without preamble. 3 hours ago, a Kryn battle group attacked the colony at Haven's Edge. They claim we violated the quarantine zone, and they were enforcing Council law. Sarah felt ice in her veins. Haven's Edge was a farming colony with a population of 50,000, mostly civilians, families, casualties. The colony's defensive platforms held them off long enough for most people to evacuate to shelters, Amara replied. But they destroyed our orbital infrastructure and bombed 3 settlement zones. Current count is 217 dead, over 1,000 injured. Sarah's hand clenched into a fist. Haven's Edge is 15 light-years inside the quarantine zone. There's no possible interpretation of Council law that justifies this attack. "I know," Amara said, "which means this wasn't about law. It was a test. Counselor Thex wanted to see how we would respond. Then let's give him an answer he won't forget," Sarah said coldly. "Where's the Kryn battle group now?" "They withdrew to the Kepler 442 system, just outside the quarantine zone. 12 vessels total, including 2 heavy cruisers. They're broadcasting their justification to the entire Council, claiming they neutralized a human military buildup that threatened Council space." Sarah was already pulling up tactical data. "The Third Fleet is conducting exercises in the Tau Ceti system. We can have them at Kepler 442 in 8 hours. Amara was quiet for a moment. "Sarah, if we retaliate, this becomes a war. The Council will have their excuse to authorize full military action against us." "They attacked our civilians," Sarah said. "If we don't respond, we signal that human lives are worthless, that any Council species can strike at us without consequences." "I'm not saying we don't respond," Amara clarified. "I'm saying we need to respond in a way that changes the entire equation. The Kryn wanted to test our strength. Let's show them something they weren't expecting." 6 hours later, the Third Fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Kepler 442 system. 23 human warships led by Admiral Marcus Torres aboard the UHNS Vindication. The Kryn battle group detected them immediately and formed a defensive formation. Their commander, a veteran named Thexus, opened a communication channel. "Human vessels, you are in violation of Council space." Thexus's translated voice crackled across the channel. "Withdraw immediately or face destruction," Admiral Torres replied with calm precision. "Kryn vessels, you are responsible for an unprovoked attack on a civilian colony that resulted in 217 deaths. Surrender yourselves for prosecution under interstellar law, or we will take you by force." Thexus made a sound that the translator rendered as contemptuous laughter. You dare threaten the Kryn Dominion? We are a council member species. You are exiles and criminals. 12 Kryn vessels against 23 human ships. You have numbers, but we have centuries of military experience and council-grade weapons. You're right, Torres said. This isn't a fair fight. What happened next would be analyzed in military academies for generations. The human fleet didn't charge forward in a traditional assault. Instead, they deployed something the Kryn had never seen before: autonomous combat drones. Thousands of them, each one smaller than a fighter craft but packed with advanced weaponry and electronic warfare systems. The drones swarmed the Kryn formation like angry insects. The Kryn point defense systems, designed to handle conventional missiles and fighter craft, were overwhelmed within minutes. Their targeting computers couldn't track so many small, fast-moving objects. While the Kryn fleet struggled against the drones, the human warships moved into optimal firing positions. The weapons they unleashed were not the plasma cannons or particle beams common in Council navies. These were railguns accelerating projectiles to relativistic speeds, and directed energy weapons that cut through Kryn shields like they weren't there. The battle lasted 17 minutes. When it was over, all 12 Kryn vessels had been disabled. Not destroyed, disabled. Their weapons were gone, their engines were offline, but their life support remained intact. The Kryn crews were alive and helpless. Admiral Torres opened the channel again. Kryn Commander Thexus, your vessels are now under human control. Your crews will be taken into custody and transported to Earth, where they will be held until proper legal proceedings can be arranged. Any attempt to resist will be met with lethal force. The message that went out to the Council wasn't from Torres, it was from Secretary General Okafor, and it was broadcast on every diplomatic channel simultaneously. To the Galactic Council and all member species, Amara began, her image appearing on screens across civilized space. 3 hours ago, Kryn Dominion forces attacked the human colony at Haven's Edge, killing 217 civilians in an unprovoked assault. The Kryn claimed they were enforcing Council law, but Haven's Edge is located well within the quarantine zone established by the Council itself. She paused, letting that sink in. For 10 years, humanity has honored the boundaries set by the Council. We have built our civilization within the space you allocated to us. We have not sought conflict. We have not violated your territory, and yet you have attacked us. Another pause. The Kryn battle group responsible for this atrocity has been defeated and captured. All Kryn personnel are alive and will be treated according to the highest standards of prisoner welfare. They will be released when the Kryn Dominion provides full restitution for the damages inflicted on Haven's Edge and submits to an independent investigation of this incident. Amara's expression hardened. But let me be absolutely clear about what happened today. You did not defeat a weak, isolated species clinging to survival. You attacked a growing power that has spent 10 years preparing for exactly this scenario. Your test has failed, and now you will face the consequences. The recording ended with one final image. The 12 disabled Kryn vessels surrounded by human warships. A visual message that needed no translation. The Council's response was chaos. Some species demanded immediate military action against humanity. Others called for investigations into the Kryn attack. A few, particularly the newer member species, quietly suggested that perhaps the Council had made a mistake 10 years ago. But the real response came from places the Council couldn't see. In the 3 weeks following the Haven's Edge incident, 7 species formally withdrew from the Galactic Council: the Talvik Consortium, the Mirian Collective, the Solan Union, the Varan Federation, and 3 others. Each one announced they would be joining a new coalition being formed by Earth. Marcus Webb, now officially titled as Earth's Minister of External Affairs, stood before a gathering of diplomatic representatives from these species. They met on Armstrong Station, deep in human space far from Council observers. "We're calling it the Terran Commonwealth," Marcus explained, displaying the charter they had spent years preparing. "Not an empire, not a hegemony, a true partnership of equals." Ambassador Kelris of the Talvik Consortium studied the document with her multiple eyes. "The Council will call this an act of war.